Thanks very much indeed. I am at the home of Raila Odinga. Mr. Odinga, pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you once again for inviting us to your home.
Now, thank you. Welcome, Smithy.
Thanks. As you heard, President Uhuru Kenyatta emphatically saying that he will continue to serve as president until he is re-elected or until a new president is elected. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I really have no problem with that. I would invite him to read Articles 134 up to 140 of the Constitution. They expel clearly what are the powers of an acting president. It's basically a lame duck president. If you be happy with that and enjoys that, then of course fine. But then it will be like Kenya is being run on a state of emergency, which nobody really would like. There will be no investors coming to Kenya. Business will continue to be hurting. So if that is what you want for this country, then I'm very sorry for him.
Do you consider Uhuru Kenyatta as the president of Kenya as we speak?
This mandate actually expired on the 8th of last month. So after that, he doesn't have any mandate. Status. Valid the president of this country on the 8th of last month. Now he is living on denial because he heeded the order of the Supreme Court to open the servers and allow for examinations, then the Supreme Court would not have asked us to go back for a re-election, but it would have just declared me the president of this country.
Okay, we'll come back to that issue in just a moment. But first, as we saw, there was paralysis on plenty of roads across the country as Jubilee supporters protested on the streets against the judiciary and the Supreme Court. They argued that the Supreme Court stole their victory. What is your response? Because clearly this entire election process has disgruntled supporters from Jubilee and also from NASA.
Because, you know, it is very unfortunate that Jubilee should really resort to this. Most unfortunate. They're basically forgetting that they are the ones who asked us to go to Supreme Court. And Uhuru Kenyatta said that once the Supreme Court made a ruling, he was going to abide by that ruling. You also need to remember that in 2013, we went to the Supreme Court. We lost the case in the Supreme Court. And we said that we did not quite agree, but we respected the verdict of the Supreme Court and urged our supporters not to protest, but to respect this because that is the rule of law.
You call it unfortunate, but there have been plenty of instances where you, as NASA, have used your own supporters to protest and demonstrate every Monday. That was the case at some point when you were disgruntled, when things were not working in your way.
Smithy, demonstrations, picketing and strikes are actually guaranteed in our Constitution. So I would not really deny anybody the right to demonstrate. I just said unfortunate that they have to resort to this. We have had this when we, for example, petitioned, and remember we went around the country to collect signatures, over 1 million signatures, to petition against the removal of the IEBC. When the same IEBC dismissed our signatures on very flimsy grounds, then we were left with no other option. Then we started protests and demonstrations to get them out of office, which is also guaranteed by the Constitution.
Part of what the Jubilee supporters were protesting about were two of the judges of the Supreme Court, that is Philomena Mwilu and also Isaac Lenaola. They argue that they worked with NASA and your lawyers that represent you were in contact with those two lawyers around the time of the elections. What is the truth?
made up allegations without any foundation whatsoever. These judges, of course, made the ruling like others, okay? It is surprising that several weeks after this happened, so very flimsy allegations are now being raised against those particular judges. Okay, the other day, it was the Chief Justice himself. You remember, a Jubilee Member of Parliament took a petition to the Supreme Court against Justice Maraga. When he left the Supreme Court, he met the President Uhuru Kenyatta at Wilson Airport, and the two of them traveled in the same aircraft to Nyeri for the agricultural show, meaning that that was really not Mr. Wambugu's petition, but Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta's petition. So all these allegations are being made, basically being made on behalf of President Uhuru Kenyatta. And I would really want to invite him to be a gentleman and respect the independence of the judiciary, because this country has a constitution which has divided powers between three institutions: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary.
On that note, today the Chief Justice made a very stern statement on behalf of the Judicial Service Commission, saying that the judiciary will not allow anyone to dictate to us how to discharge our mandate to the people of Kenya under the Constitution. Now, clearly Jubilee are disgruntled with the courts in 2017. You were disgruntled with the courts back in 2013. Are we seeing a case where parties are attacking the courts and the judiciary when things don't sway in their favor?
Smriti, you can see the sharp contrasts between 2013 and 2017. In 2013, we had a very strong case. But then when we presented our evidence in the Supreme Court, the Jubilee side and the IBC lawyers came and said that the evidence we had filed was out of time, and that therefore that evidence should be dismissed. And then the Supreme Court agreed with them. So without looking at our evidence, 960 pages of it, they said it was filed out of time and therefore should be expunged from the court records. We did not argue. Then they went on to dismiss our case and declare the Jubilee candidates having been validly elected. All that we said was that we don't agree with the Supreme Court, but we respect the ruling of the Supreme Court. That is what is called respecting the rule of law. Now here, this time around, the pendulum has swung the other side, and they have found that this Uhuru Kenyatta was not validly elected on the August 8th because of several irregularities which were in the evidence we compiled and presented before the court. Now, this time, they were hailed as angels by the Jubilee. This time round, because they have ruled against Jubilee, they are now criminals. There are all sorts of wild allegations are being raised against them. We tell Jubilee that you cannot have it your way all the times. Please respect the independence of judiciary, like we have done ourselves as NASA.
Well, as you've said, the Judicial Service Commission is an independent institution, but so too is the IEBC. And with all the demands that you are making on the IEBC, one may argue that you are interfering with the independence of that institution.
We are not interfering with the independence of IEBC. We have brought credible evidence before the court to show that IEBC colluded with Jubilee to rig the elections. And the evidence is there for anyone to see. How did Mr. Chirchir, who is the chief presidential agent of Jubilee, have access to the IEBC server? And this is not something that is picked out of the blues. We found it in the logs presented to us by the IEBC itself. And they started posting results in the server on the 7th of August. There's a day before the actual elections were held. They started voting already in the server. If that is not collusion to deny the people of Kenya their rights, then I don't know what it is. So there are several other incidences which were quoted. So some people then hacked into the system using the chairman's password and altered results 10,000 times.
But based on all of that, moving forward, you are making several demands on the IEBC. And there have been questions as to who is Raila Odinga to make such demands on that institution that is independent.
Raila Odinga is a presidential candidate. Therefore, he has every right to demand that certain changes be made in the IEBC before he goes back to an election. Because what we saw last time was not an election. It was basically a sham, something that was basically designed from the very beginning to fail.
But
and
if it was designed,
only one outcome.
If you believe from the beginning it was designed to fail, why did you participate in that election?
This I'm telling you the facts after the acts that we got to know when we now went to the Sterling Center. And first we did ask the IBC to confirm to us the figures which were being displayed on the television screens on that day.
But you did have doubts and beliefs that the election that took place on the 8th of August was being rigged, didn't you?
We complained when the transmission process started. As you know, Smithy, the law had said that the results should be declared at the polling station and then transmitted to the constituency tallying center. And then at the constituency tallying center, they will be added. And at the end of it, the returning officer will declare the results. And the results as declared by the returning officer should be final. And then just forwarded to the National Tallying Center for addition,
right,
compared with what had come from the polling stations. This did not work. So you see, what the observers were talking about was the process of people reporting, opening of the polling station, polling or balloting, closing the station, and counting. All that process was fine. The problem was with the transmission of the results,
okay,
the polling stations and at the constituency center.
And
so that is where the mess was.
All right, we certainly know that that is your major concern. Moving forward, though, as we speak, with 27 days to go before the re-election, are you standing your ground that you will not participate in the October 17th election if all your demands are not met?
It's not a question of us, we are not going to participate. We're just saying that there will be no elections in the Republic of Kenya. If you're talking about a certain part of Kenya doing an election, that is not the election of the Republic of Kenya. That's what we're talking about. But we are saying that there's sufficient time to change the things which went wrong last time round, in order that we can have a proper, free and fair elections. Jubilee are basically talking that there should be any kind of election. As we are saying, we should have elections which are held in accordance to the constitution of our country.
All right, we need to take a break at this point, but plenty more to discuss. Raila Odinga says if his demands are not met, there will be no election. But what does that mean for the country? Do stay with us right here on NTV. When we return, my interview with Raila Odinga continues. Welcome back to NTV. My conversation with Raila Odinga, the NASA presidential candidate, now continues. We're coming to you live from his home here in Sharon. Before we took the break, Mr. Odinga, you said that you will not participate in an October 17th election or in any election if your demands are not met. No election. What does that mean?
No, we say that we want our demand of the IBC to the CEO, which he has not even responded. It was written yesterday. Now, what we are saying is that the people who are responsible for irregularities, for the rigging, are criminals who should be prosecuted in a court of law, and that they should be dismissed from the service of IB. That they did this is no longer secret, because the court actually found this process not to be apparent and credible, and the detailed judgment is going to come out tomorrow. So we are saying that we cannot be expected to do the same thing the same time and expect different results. So either Jubilee wants a fair contest where the playing field is level, or they want to just run against themselves.
But that doesn't quite answer my question. You said you will not participate in an election, but there will be no election. How are you going to ensure that the IEBC does not conduct an election?
The majority of Kenyans will not participate in that election. So
how do you know that? Because President Uhuru Kenyatta does have a massive support network across the country.
He has his supporters across the country, but that is not going to be an election of the people of Kenya. Okay? A credible election of the people of Kenya means that all those people who are eligible to vote will participate in the elections. So you can call it an election of a certain part of Kenya, and that will be fine. So it will not be an election of the Republic of Kenya, is what you are saying.
But you realize that under the Constitution, the IEBC is mandated to carry out an election within the 60 days, and we're nearing that time now. If they do, and you do not participate in it, President Uhuru Kenyatta will be part of that election and will be unopposed. Therefore, he will gain the votes and may then be sworn in as president once again. Wouldn't that be political suicide on your part?
It's not political suicide. It will basically just take this country to another level of campaign for electoral justice. You see, what we're talking about is that we don't want to create what we call electoral autocracy, which has happened in several other African countries, where people have lost any faith in elections. You find 10%, 20% of the electorate turning up, the incumbent then getting 98% of the votes. That is not what we want in this country. You will see that Kenyans turned out in large numbers. An average of 80% of Kenyans turned out to participate in the elections last time. They would like to re-exercise their right to vote, but they cannot do it under the present circumstances without proper reform being done in the IBC, without doing some changes in terms of ICT infrastructure. Where you have got this company called Saffron Mofo, which is also in collusion with the Jubilee to rig the elections. And then you have another one called Al Ghurair, which printed fake papers and which were used all over the place. You remember there were also ungazetted polling stations which also produce results.
I will come to those issues in just a moment, but what I'm trying to get from you is that you have stated several times that there will be no election if your demands are not met? You say the demands are simple, but some of them may be unrealistic to meet at this stage. Do you have a plan to ensure that the IEBC does not carry out an election?
Smithy, tell me what is unrealistic. When we're saying that the KIEMS system that was used for transmission of results had serious integrity issues. That, for example, they were terminated in France and that they were never really transmitted back to the server at Bomas of Kenya. Is that unrealistic?
What's unrealistic are the timelines. And
but we're saying you want us to go back and have a repeat of what happened that time. Is that
but then my question is, then what will happen? If we don't go back to an election,
we must address these issues, and they can be addressed. And we have even said that, look, there are companies which can provide the system and have it tested and work within the given time frame.
All right, we'll come to that in just a moment. Let me bring it to the attention about leakage at the IEBC first. And what has happened is that there have been more questions now on really what should have perhaps been a comprehensive response from the IEBC CEO, that is Ezra Chiloba, in an attempt to clear the air over questions raised in a memo from the chair, Wafula Chebukati. Now, Chiloba's response has in fact raised more doubts. Ken Majungu with the details on that leaked memo.
In a confidential memo once again leaked to the media, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission chairperson Wafula Chebukati has suspended 3 ICT officers at the commission. James Muhatia, the ICT director who only returned during the August 8th general election, Paul Mugo, the ICT coordinator, and Boniface Oamai, an ICT officer, have all been accused of not helping the commission and the country in undertaking its duty. Chebukati says this suspension is, quote, necessary to not just restore waning public confidence in the Commission's ability, but also to assert the integrity and fidelity of the Commission to the rule of law. Chebukati was reacting to responses made by the IEBC Chief Executive Officer Ezra Chiloba after an earlier memo widely circulated questioned how the August 8th general election was conducted. His response, however, elicited further questions from the chairperson. Chebukati wants Chiloba to clarify how 2 ICT officers acquired privileges under his name to delete and upload forms. Further, Wafula Chebukati wants Chiloba to explain under whose authority the 2 acquired super user in respect to the presidential election. The officers also are said to have deleted what Chiloba described as unclear or corrupt forms instead of archiving them. Chebukati notes that under the workflow he was expressly prohibited from deletion and overwriting. But that's not all. Chebukati also wants Chiloba to explain how an account was established in his name, yet no proposal was tabled to establish an account in the name of the chairperson during the plenary meeting. Chebukati is also seeking clarifications on why Chiloba's response does not contain answers on how a significant number of polling stations sent text messages without images of the results form, yet a plenary meeting resolved that where there was no network, both text and image will be automatically stored in the KIEMS device and automatically transmitted when sufficient network was realized. Also not answered conclusively is why the GPS location of the KIEMS kit was turned off on the 5th of August, 3 days before the election. He wants to know how the location of the kits will have been determined without the feature to locate it. And of importance, Chebukati wants to know how the Commission will then audit the mobile network operators who claimed coverage of particular areas and were contracted for the same. On the printing of the prescribed forms used by the returning officers, Chebukati notes that Chiloba indicated there were no notable failures. Yet, during an interview with NTV last week, he admitted printing failures which could have destroyed some forms. Chebukati wants Chiloba to explain why there were printing failures that resulted in the destruction of the forms. This memo is dated yesterday, 18th of September 2017. Ken Mijungu, NTV.
Well, Wafula Chebukati, that is the chair of the IEBC, has reacted to the repeated leakage, saying that it underestimates the autonomy of the authority, of the IEBC. He says that he will engage the fellow commissioners and investigate into the matter. All right, elsewhere now, Jubilee has hit out at the NASA leader Raila Odinga, calling for an explanation over what they allege is his role in the relationship between the IEBC and the ICT solutions provider, that's Safran Morpho. Well, the provider is at the center of a war of words between Jubilee and NASA. Have a look.
The name Safran Morpho was recommended to the government of Kenya and to IEBC by Raila Odinga.
A day after allegations linking Raila Odinga to Safran Morpho Company were made at a vote-hunting gathering in Busia County, leaders from the Jubilee Party have supported the Ababu Namwamba claims, insisting that it was time for the NASA presidential candidate to come clean on the matter.
The cabinet subcommittee that dealt with the issues to do with acquisition of BVR kits prior to the 2013 elections, that subcommittee was chaired by none other than Raila Odinga in his capacity as a prime minister.
The debate about the French tech company refusing to die down, only picking up momentum, with the Jubilee claims that the team that is campaigning against its involvement in the forthcoming election is indeed behind the company getting into business with the IEBC in the first place.
Anybody trying to now turn around and say this company is not should not have supplied these gadgets is actually using an opportunity for himself and being dishonest, because he's the one who brought that company to Kenya.
The NASA coalition has also claimed that top Jubilee leadership and electoral officials have received a bribe of 200 million shillings to award the company the tender for the elections.
Ushahidi iko ya kutosha ya kuonyesha uhusiano baina ya kampuni inaitwa Safran Morpho na viongozi wa IEBC wengine na viongozi wa serikali.
Though the company, through an independent audit, has distanced itself from any wrongdoing, the NASA coalition leaders claim that its complicity in fraud extends beyond hacking, but to the willfully allowing gross violations of the IEBC ICT user policy. Both sides appear to be digging in, despite the reality of an election that is drawing even closer. Leila Mohammed, NTV.
So, Mr. Odinga, you asked me earlier what is unrealistic about some of your demands. At this point, it is unrealistic to demand for a new ICT service provider. As it is, Safran Morpho has requested for more time if they are to introduce new electronic kits. That is what you want, new kits. However, you do not want Safran Morpho to provide those kits. You accuse them of bribery. Why else do you not want Safran Morpho to be part of the planning for the election?
First, Smithy, allow me to respond to those very wild allegations about my connection supposedly with Safran Morpho. As a Prime Minister, my role was to coordinate and supervise the functions of government ministries. There was a crisis, and we held a meeting at the office of the President under the chair of the President himself. And it transpired that the IBC were not going to be able to deliver an ICT infrastructure for the elections. Because of delays, the Indian company which had won the tender had been disqualified, the South African. So they had sourced now this company, which was a Canadian company. It turned out to be a Canadian branch of a French company. That was recommended by the Treasury and the IEBC. They brought these recommendations to a meeting chaired by the President Kibaki. Then the Kibaki transferred this to a committee under the chair of the Prime Minister. The Canadian government said that the company they were recommending was a branch, a Canadian branch of a French company. And therefore the Canadian government was not ready to do a G2G with the Kenya government. That is how then, at that point, the French government offered to do a G2G with the Kenya government, which was turned down by the Treasury. Instead, they went for a commercial loan through Standard Chartered in London to buy this equipment from this branch of the French company, from Mofo, Canada, the one that supposedly supplied equipment. Equipment, however, came from France. By the way, you need to know that this is the money for which they went to borrow Eurobond money to pay. The so-called syndicated loan to Standard Chartered was basically that money, and it was overpriced. But the company was introduced by the Treasury and the IBC at that time and never had anything to do with it. Now, the equipment eventually came directly from France into Kenya. Mm-hmm. Right now, the same company was again single-sourced, this time by the IBC, but through an influence of a senior member of this Jubilee government. We have evidence that shows that there was a lot of underhand dealings which involved senior officials in the IBC and senior officials in this government.
Can you name those senior officials in the IBC and in the government?
They know themselves. I will not name them here now. They know themselves, but at an appropriate time, maybe those names will be made public.
Why aren't you making those names public now?
I don't want to embarrass them at this moment in time.
Perhaps not on live television, but have you made the names public to the courts or to anybody, since you're accusing them of bribery?
People know those names. They know even the lawyer through which the money was paid, whose account can be verified, and then how they were couriers collecting money from that lawyer's office and taking him to this Jubilee official and also the senior officials of the IBC. Those facts are known. So I'm saying this without fear of contradiction, that such evidence exists. So this company was not the one that really qualified in the tender. It was single-sourced for those purposes.
Deny allegations that some Jubilee government officials are making that back in 2013 you single-sourced the organization whilst you were Prime Minister.
The facts are there. They're very bare. They know that I myself, as a Prime Minister, the matter was brought to me to salvage the situation. And the name Sabra Mofo came from the Treasury, and who was then the Minister of Finance, you know,
and
who were in the IBC is known.
So just to clarify, if, well, it's now called OT Morpho, if OT Morpho is involved in this re-election, you will refuse to participate?
No, what you have said is that OT Morpho is actually the cause of the mess here. And it is not only the first time. In Nigeria, they were fined for corruptly acquiring a contract by bribing officials of the Electoral Commission. So this is really not the first time. So we have said that, and what they did this time around is actually unethical, because remember, the court ordered that they should allow access to their servers, read-only, to us. They refused to give that access, and kind of flimsy excuses being given by the lawyers in court that the people were still asleep in Europe
right.
at that time. Now, if you have, for example, a Visa card, and you want to use it to buy, to pay a bill, nobody can tell you that the
It
server
cannot be used, right? Because people on the other side are asleep. Let's just come to the story about leakage at the IEBC. This is not the first time it has happened. Does this deepen your insecurity and perhaps your mistrust of that commission?
Yeah, we knew that certain things were not right, but we did not know how bad the rot was, to what extent, until we saw what was happening with the results. You see, for example, so many other companies participated. You see, Safaricom and Telecom Kenya were involved in this. You know that Jubilee had an office somewhere on top of the Safaricom building on Wayaki Way around that time. But then that so the results which were being posted, which people were seeing on the screen, the television screens, were not coming from an equipment which is somewhere in an institution in Karen operated by the military. And that's where they were posting. There they had this algorithm which gave me a certain percentage, and it was moving almost as a straight line between me and President Uhuru Kenyatta.
So as we speak, 27 days to the 17th October re-election, if that date remains, do you trust the IEBC even just a little bit?
The trust level is very low. If you on a scale of 1 to 10, I would put them at, say, 1.5. That low. As presently constituted, I doubt their ability to conduct free and fair elections.
Okay, we'll come back to that in just a moment. Let's talk about the economy, because that is one sector that has been hugely negatively impacted by the initial August 8th election and also the Supreme Court ruling. What do you have to say about the way the economy is hurting and the way it's been hit, Mr. Odinga? Because part of the situation that we're in is because of your quest for justice, which we understand.
Yes, you know that, Smithy, justice is expensive. Look at what the people of South Africa went through in order to get justice, and it took them many years to do so. I am very conscious of the fact that economy is hurting in our country. I know our business is down. I know how much losses have been realized in our stock market today. I know that there are no investors coming, and no investors will come until this impasse is resolved one way or the other.
But doesn't that concern you and worry you?
Certainly it does concern me. It does concern me, but unfortunately, the solution does not lie within my hands. I wish it did. The other option would be that you want me to just say, let's go, and allow the Jubilee to continue the way they have been misruled, the way they have mismanaged the economy of this country. The people of Kenya don't want this. So I'm doing this not because Raila Odinga wants it. I'm doing it because of my love for my country.
But Raila Odinga, you do want it.
No, I want it on behalf of the people of Kenya.
But what about on behalf of yourself as Raila Odinga, the man that has attempted to be the president of Kenya 4 times?
Smithy, it is the people who have all the times asked me to run. I've always said it has never been because of Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga is so ambitious. And you know, we won in 2007, it was stolen. We won in 2013, it was stolen. Because the same method they've used this time, they used it in 2013. They perfected it. Unfortunately, this time around, we also knew the kind of game they were playing, and we played it better. That's how we caught them and we were able to expose them. Had the Supreme Court agreed to consider the evidence we presented before it in 2013, the ruling would have been different. Okay, so what we are trying to say is this must come to a stop. You cannot have a situation where people spend hours on a queue in sunshine and in rain to cast their votes.
But when
and then
will it...
ultimately, it is not the vote that came from the ground, but the computers at the Bomas of Kenya that vote.
In your opinion, when will it stop? Because the longer you postpone this election or say that there will not be an election, the process will just keep going and going unless Uhuru Kenyatta is re-elected if an election takes place and you don't partake. So when will it stop, really?
This must be the time that it stops. We stopped the single-party dictatorship against the will of the people who are practicing it. We stopped those abuses. We stopped the arbitrary arrest and detentions of Kenyans without trial. We stopped the arrogance of the administration when you had what they call a Public Order Act, where you had to go for permits to the chiefs and so on to have a kind of a rally. We introduced a democratic constitution against the will of the dictators. So we are also going to deal with the issue of electoral rigging in this country. And this is the time for Kenyans to stand strong against this impunity.
Mr. Odinga, the reality is that time is not on your side. Certain demands that you are making ahead of this re-election requires time. Realistically, there is not enough time. I want to just bring us back to the point that I raised earlier. You said that if your demands are not met, there will be no election. Please tell us, what does that mean? Does it mean that Raila Odinga will stay here at his home in Karen? Does it mean that Raila Odinga will use his supporters to somehow ensure that the IEBC does not carry out an election? Tell us what it means.
Smith, first, we'll accept that the justice is expensive. So you, in terms of the time is short. Justice is expensive, so there's no time limit to achieving justice.
But the reality is there is a time limit at this point in this situation.
There's no
60
time,
days
there's
is
no
the time
limit. Those laws are made for the people of Kenya, not the other way around. So they must serve the people of Kenya, and therefore there must be justice. Kenya is not going to collapse in 60 days. Kenya will continue to exist. So you must understand that. And you cannot say that do it wrong because there's no time to do it right. I disagree with that kind of philosophy.
So then what is the way forward? Because as per the Constitution, it's 60 days.
Because we must teach our children the right things and to do the right things the right way. Otherwise, we are going to create a society that is immoral, where people do not value morality and things and righteousness. Now, you've said Kenyans are crying for justice. They want electoral justice. And the electoral justice they must get at this point in time. So we will get it. We are sure that the kind of reforms that we are requiring, what we have put in our what we call irreducible minimum, are realizable. You'll see that the observers, the European election observers, the EU, have come up with an 18-point document in things that they see went wrong and that needed to be righted before these elections can be done properly. They are not different from the points which are in our irreducible minimum document. So even foreigners believe that things went wrong now and that they must be corrected. So the international community is watching and is actually supporting proper electoral reforms in Kenya.
Mr. Odinga, I feel though you're not quite answering my question. What does no elections mean?
That's what it is, what you're basically saying. No elections, meaning that there are no elections in the Republic of Kenya.
How are you going to ensure that?
There can be elections for the constituency of Gatundu or Kiambu. that is not Kenyans electing. You see, you saw the so-called demonstrations. How far did it go?
Are you going to ensure there is no election by telling your people not to go to the polls?
Not telling my people. I'm just saying that there will be no elections in the Republic of Kenya. It may be in a few places here and there. But that is not election of the Republic of Kenya.
Well, the IEBC has the mandate to carry out that election,
Yes.
So there will be an election, except you will participate in it.
IEBC has a constitutional mandate to carry out elections in accordance with the Constitution. The Supreme Court dismissed the last elections because it was not carried out in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya. So the IEBC has a constitutional obligation to do elections properly, what we call free, fair, transparent, and accountable elections.
All right, perhaps that's a matter of waiting and watching to really see what no elections means, if it comes to that. For all you know, an election may be carried out because all your demands may be met. As we close, Mr. Odinga, tomorrow you are expected to have a meeting with the IEBC and also President Uhuru Kenyatta. What can we expect from that conversation?
We were going to have a meeting with the IEBC tomorrow. However, that meeting has now been postponed.
By whom?
By the IEBC. We got a message from the chairman, Mr. Fula Chebukachi, that the Jubilee side had said that since tomorrow is going to be the day of the ruling, or reading of the ruling by the Supreme Court, they felt that they needed to wait until after that ruling had come out before any meaningful discussion can take place. So it will not take place tomorrow. But we also say that we will only participate in those meetings after we've received a response from the IEBC to our letter, which we wrote accompanied by our irreducible minimum conditions.
Okay, and just finally before we close, the country is extremely divided as we speak. In fact, it has been for a long time. If you are elected as President of Kenya, how do you intend to govern a divided country, and what measures will you put in place to ensure there's unity?
You see, Kenyans are not divided. Kenyans love each other. Kenyans speak to each other all the time. It is the leadership which actually divides the people.
And you are a leader.
But I am a leader who is known to be more nationalistic in approach. As you know, that I have been a prime minister of this country, and they know what I was able to do in all parts of this country. So the Kenyans will trust me, and they know that I will only want the best for this country. I have an ambition to try to unite this country so that this country can rise from where it is to where it should really belong. I will be able to deal with the issues affecting this country. I will attend to the economy to see that the economy is growing. I will deal with the critical issue, the cost of living in this country. I will deal with the issue of corruption.
But the issue I'm asking specifically is about uniting Kenyans. How will you do that? You say you will. Any leaders would say they would, but how?
What you need to do is basically first begin by embracing all Kenyans and being inclusive in your approach in governance, so that people feel that they belong, they are recognized. All communities in this country, without exception, I've been saying that every Kenyan, from the smallest, the El Molo, to the biggest, the Kikuyu, will feel comfortable in my government.
Okay, all right.
I will bring them together, I will embrace them, and they will feel that they're really truly part and parcel of my government.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time this evening, Raila Odinga on NTV.